Disability rights, as you know it in the United States, are at risk, and we need to be paying attention. There is currently a lawsuit that Texas and 16 other states are participating in, trying to get rid of Section 504, which is a foundational civil rights anti-discrimination law for people with disabilities. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Isa. I'm a disabled writer and advocate getting my PhD in communication studies with a focus in disability resilience and resistance. Today, I spent my afternoon actually reading through the lawsuit to find out what it actually says, and then I also attended an information session hosted by the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. In today's video, I'm going to first talk about what Section 504 actually is, then I'm going to talk about what the lawsuit actually says, and I'll finish up what you need to do to help fight for disability rights. So those of you who are not familiar with Section 504 is a part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It is a foundational piece of the Americans with Disability Act. It was incredibly important with getting the Americans with Disability Act passed. What's important to know about Section 504 is first, it's an anti-discrimination law. So what that means is that it's not about programs that are provided to people. It's not about giving or restricting those programs. What it's specifically saying is that you cannot discriminate based off of disability, and there are certain things that different companies and organizations have to do. But Section 504 specifically is only related to any company that receives any federal funds. So if they are found guilty of discriminating based off of disability, then they will no longer receive any federal funds. Put in the most simple terms possible, Section 504 makes it possible for people with disabilities to seek justice when they are discriminated against. Broadly, Section 504 is talking about housing, employment, education, transportation, and healthcare. And the healthcare is the really important part that I want you guys to remember for this video. Now, there have been several updates to Section 504 throughout the years, but the most recent new rule, which is called the final rule, was passed in May and then put into place in July of 2024. This final rule adds extra protections and clarity for those protections for people with disabilities. Some examples in healthcare, you cannot discriminate against someone because they have a disability. So that means based off your interpretations on whether or not their life has value as a disabled person, or you assume that disabled lives have less value, and this is because in response to the way that disabled people were treated during COVID. So if a person has autism, you cannot deny them a heart transplant under this new rule. If a person has an intellectual disability, they cannot be denied an antibiotic because the doctor thinks that living as a disabled person is not worthy enough or that it places a burden on society. It does not force people to receive medical treatment. So if a person does not consent to medical treatment, they do not have to have it, but that offer has to be there. They cannot be discriminated against because of an arbitrary idea of what a disabled person is worth. I want to be very clear that this doesn't mean that a disabled person can never be denied medical care. So if it's not the most appropriate form of medication or medical care, then yes, that can be denied. So if it's not the appropriate course of action, then they're not required to just do that medical action. Another area of protection under the new rule is adding protections for parents and children with disabilities. So there's a lot of stuff where in the child welfare area, it's not accessible for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. There are a lot of disabled people who have their children taken away. There's not adequate resources offered to disabled children in foster care, and it focuses on the importance of reunification of the family. The last big area is about communication and technology when it comes to accessibility, making sure that technology is accessible, that healthcare, that telehealth is still provided as an option, and ensuring the protections that people still can have access and that web spaces are accessible. Again, Section 504 only pertains to organizations that receive any federal funds. The Americans with Disability Act is more of a blanket, broad protections for people with disabilities. The reason why this particular lawsuit is scary is because, first off, it can set up the precedent to then come and attack the Americans with Disability Act, but also is that these new rules were established given the situations since COVID, the last 20 years, to kind of give updated protections based off of the time that we are living, adding technology because technology has drastically changed, making sure that we're addressing the actual needs of people with disabilities. Okay, let's get into the lawsuit because it's a lot. So the lawsuit is predicated on this idea that the new rule is now saying that gender dysphoria counts as a disability. Now, I want to draw a clarification here. And again, this comes from clarification that the legal advocates had in the meeting I went to today. They explained that there's the preamble and then there's the actual law. In the preamble, it does mention gender dysphoria as a potential area that this law may apply to. This is later, Issa, and I just want to clarify. The preamble is not the actual law. It does not count as the actual law. There is no mention of gender dysphoria under the actual law. So this whole case is predicated off of an idea that's not even in the new final rule of Section 504. This does not mean I am saying that trans rights are not important. They are very important. They should be protected. But what you need to understand is that this lawsuit is focusing on the gender dysphoria aspect, using transphobia and using all of this rhetoric that it's been building against trans people to fight disability rights, to try to destroy disability rights. And we'll get into what it actually says. So the first big thing that the lawsuit talks about is gender dysphoria and how it can't be considered a disability and it's inconsistent and all of this back and forth, and it really shouldn't be protected. And it goes back to the original Section 504, which it says that didn't count for that gender dysphoria or gender identity situations don't count as disabilities. And it really, really focuses and hones in on this thing. Over half of the lawsuit is just talking about this gender dysphoria issue. The second half of this is talking about the role of government on state rights and then also funding. So they are arguing because it is the removal of all federal funds for that institution, then that means that the federal government is overstepping. The federal government should be a guiding force, not a coercive force. So they're calling it coercion. They're calling it illegal. They're saying that it is unconstitutional. And they're saying that it is too financially burdensome. And part of that financial burden is being told how they are allowed to use their funds. And that goes back to the reunification elements, the integration elements, because Section 504 and by extension the Americans with Disability Act are very much focused on making sure that disabled people not only have access to healthcare and education and employment, but it is equal access, that it needs to be integrated access. They argued that it is not fair that an organization that has nothing to do with disability, I think the lawsuit talks about a water section of the state government in Texas, which has nothing to do with disability, so it should not be held to that standard. However, we're talking about discrimination. We're talking about it's an anti-discrimination law. It is not a programs law. So the whole point is to make sure that you cannot discriminate. The Congress has already decided when Section 504 was first passed, and then again with the Americans with Disability Act, that the financial burden of providing equal opportunities was not unconstitutional. They've already made that decision, but they're arguing that that was wrong. That was a wrong decision. They're trying to fight that decision. Their overarching argument is that Section 504 was unconstitutional at the time that it was passed. Here's the thing. The entire lawsuit is going back and forth about this unconstitutional thing, the gender dysphoria, then also this coercion financial element. And they're trying to create this argument, and it sounds in the argumentation like they're only discussing the new rule. The final rule is what it's called. But in the actual demands, when you read the actual demands, they are demanding that Section 504 be deemed unconstitutional. They are demanding that Section 504 be deemed as something that the constituents do not have to, that's the states, cannot be punished for not following. This lawsuit is specifically looking at healthcare at the moment, but that doesn't mean it's not free of risking education, transportation, and other spaces. Okay, so this is what you need to understand, is that the right has been, over the course of the last couple of years, really amping up this anti-trans rhetoric. trying to make you afraid of trans people, trying to make trans people sound like pedophiles, like people who are abusing the system, like people who are going to hurt women, that people who are horrible, they demoralize them, they dehumanize them. I need you to understand that the anti-trans rhetoric that you have been hearing is a tool that they are specifically trying to use to get you to not think critically about the things that they're trying to do. They're using all of this in the name of women's rights. They're saying that they're doing this to protect families, but they're not. They're trying to frame trans people as the villain when they are the most vulnerable community in this situation. And specifically with this law, what's absolutely the most disgusting part is that it's working. Even in the meeting that I went to, there was a situation where people were asking questions about the trans, like what's going on with the trans element and everything, which distracts us from what is actually happening. What is it that they're actually saying? They're saying that Section 504 is unconstitutional, that it is coercive. And they're saying that not because of they have their argument of the dysphoria thing, but the coercion is a completely different section of the lawsuit. This is what's happening across a lot of politics right now. The thing that I want you to be aware of is that, yes, this is a really scary thing, and I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm just trying to be realistic. I'm trying to outline how rhetoric is being used, because when you hear that rhetoric, regardless of its connection to a policy, you need to stop and deconstruct. You need to see what is actually being said here. What is the actual risk of trans people existing in your space? And we need to ally with trans people, with trans folk who are not being protected in our society because they're coming for them, and they're using the way that they're coming for them to come for us. So separating and being mad is not going to be productive. It's not going to protect anyone, and it's only going to result in further separation and isolation, and it's not going to help. Why it's important to understand that is, in the meeting that I went today, people were talking about their experiences and like what to do, because they had been trying to reach out to their attorney generals, and the attorney general office, specifically in Georgia, and it might be more places, but that's the one that was referenced the most, is saying that no, this lawsuit isn't happening, or this lawsuit is only about gender dysphoria. It's about the trans issue. It's not about Section 504. It's not about getting removed Section 504. I beg you, please read, and I'm going to link it, the document. It's a lot to try to understand. I know it's legal jargon. It's very difficult. I'm also going to include a more straightforward description of it, but please just read the document, try to understand, try to see what's going on, because that is not true. Someone either doesn't know, they signed something that they didn't realize what it said, or they're lying. And it could be a combination. It could be different people are saying different things. There's a lot of misinformation happening around this, potentially disinformation. So please be very careful when you're walking around the subject. It could act as a precedent, which that's laws typically, like legal situations like this will be like, well, this is how they ruled in these cases, and this kind of says how we should function in the future. So they may use this if it wins, which hopefully it won't, because we're all going to rally together, and I'm going to tell you how to do that in just a second. But they could use this as means of saying that any law that tries to restrict what a state is able to do and who they're able to discriminate against is unconstitutional. That means that it could be used against even more communities that need our protection. Here's what you need to do. First of all, if you live in one of the states that are currently in the lawsuit, contact your attorney general. Do not contact Congress representative yet. We're not there yet. That has specifically come from the advocates at the meeting I went to today with the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund. They said, do not contact congressmen yet, focus on the attorney generals. If you are outside of the 17 states, then you need to reach out to your attorney general if they seem like a friendly one, someone who cares about disability rights. That's important specifically if this is successful, because we're going to need them. And then I'll extend to Congress. The second thing you need to do is start telling other people in the community. Share this video if you can. Find other resources. I'm going to have some resources down below for you to be able to do that. And it also includes how to get in contact with your attorney general. The final thing you need to do is get your story ready. Write it down, post it on social media, do something with it, prepare it, get it ready. because there will be a time when disability advocates and organizers are going to ask you for your stories, to start telling your stories, the importance of Section 504, how Section 504 has impacted your life. And when that moment happens, these stories are going to be really, really, really important for fighting for our rights. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I learned about this a little bit 2 days ago, and I have learned as much as I can about the subject, and I'll continue to be learning as much as I can and listening to disability organizers and trying to take advice and direction from them. But I want to take a moment. We're going to take a deep breath. So, ready? Take a deep breath in. Breath out. The world is not ending. It may feel like it. Because the good news is that we are resilient people. We have been fighting this fight for a really long time, and we had a lot of wins. And there are certain rights, and we're still on that journey. Like, acknowledging how far we have come. The world does not see us the same way, and it can feel like that. I know eugenics is particularly pervasive right now. It's so in our face, especially after COVID, but there's so much in the world and the way that people see us, and all is not lost. And I just want you to remember that Section 504 and the Americans with Disability Act has made it possible for especially those of us who are younger to get access to education. It is the reason why I'm getting my PhD right now. Just because it is at risk, just even if, let's say, the lawsuit happens, doesn't change, it doesn't steal, doesn't take away the worth of my education. It doesn't take away the sacrifices of the disability community. It doesn't take away the work that you have put in. There's something, and I wish I remembered who said it in the video or in the session I went today, but he said that when Section 504 was passed, that and the Americans with Disability Act was passed, it was just a punch in the face of ableism. But when ableism got back up, we needed to be ready to fight. And now it's time to fight. And that's really scary. It's really intimidating. But we are empowered because of the people who fought for us to get to this point. And now we have to fight to keep our rights. And I just want you to just sit in the wonder of that, to keep it, when that wasn't even a thing that we had 50 years ago. And yes, it feels like we're going backwards. Yes, it feels terrifying. But we are stronger because of the work that people did before us, and we will continue to fight and continue to make the world progress and to continue to make sure that people don't forget that we are here and that our lives matter and that we won't be silent and we will be inconvenient, because that's the best way. That's the way that Section 504 only happened because of the longest sit-in in U.S. history. Disabled people have been some of the biggest disruptors. Be annoying. Talk to everyone. Doing what we need to protect and understand and stay in community with not only other people with disabilities, but make sure that we are centering the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. We need to center trans individuals, especially right now with all the anti-trans rhetoric. It is vital for all of our survival. So, if you are someone who wants to learn more about disability rights, disability history, my journey in higher education, please like and subscribe. And more important than anything else, just take a moment in the mess of the world and recognize your disabled ancestors. Thank them for the work that they've put in. And now remember, it is our time to rise. It is our time to fight and invest in our future and the future of our community.